So this is Music Production 101 Lesson 2. We're actually going to start making a production from the ground up. Here today, I've already thrown in a sample that I like. I always start with a chord pattern because if it really resonates with me, the rest of the sounds really come easy. Plus, when I personally start with a chord pattern, it can always tell me my BPM of the track that I'll be working in. Not that I can't change it later on, but I get a good idea of the feeling that I'm going to go with, or the speed or the energy of the track. And it will also give me the key so that when digging for other samples, you don't have to struggle with trying to find a sample that really works, because as long as you're working in the same key, most of them are going to sound like they belong. Whether or not they're right for your production is a different story. But if they feel like they belong already half the battle is done for you. So this lesson I'm going to show you how I make a beat, how I start it. We're going to go over how to loop things in a 4, 8, and 16 bar loop, and how to solo or bypass tracks, meaning turn off or turn on tracks, so that they feel like they're the different part of the song. So for example, at the drop, you're going to have most of your elements in. And if I'm making the track all within the 4, 8, or 16 bar loop, I know that all my elements have already been produced and mixed to all work with each other. Now if I want to go into the breakdown or a break, all I'm doing is turning off, bypassing certain channels, so that, for example, in the breakdown or in the break, there is no kick drum. All I have to do is turn off the signal that is making the kick go, but all the other elements are still working together. So if I don't like the hat progression that's happening at that part of the drop in my break, bypass, turn off, now you're no longer hearing it. So as we dive deeper, you're going to understand, and you're going to see exactly how I do that and how I'm thinking about it as I progress through a production. So to start off, I've already picked a sample that I liked off Splice. Now I may go ahead and convert it to MIDI, which you can do just by this right-clicking. Convert harmony, melody, or drums. In this case, this would be more like a harmony. Now you'll notice that the sample says 100 and the BPM is 120. I really liked the sample that I played through Splice at 100, but I work a lot in house music and deep house and something more on the chiller side of electronic music, something more a little bit more emotional, that sort of nature. So what I've done is I've just changed my global BPM, which is up here on the top left, to suit 120 beats per minute, and this, although it says 100, is 120 beats per minute. But just for my own organization, I threw it into my piano line because it is a piano element. I'm going to call it 120 BPM and C minor, so that if I'm ever pulling up this project later on, I know that whatever my main chords are, I know what the BPM of it is. So the second step is to loop it. Now it's already in an 8-bar loop. 8 bars, 1, 2, 8. Music is very mathematical, so elements will change almost every 8 bars, depending on the genre, but I would say most genres change at least an element every 8 bars. So for this one, I'm just going to hit Command L or Control L as well. You'll see this one highlight. This is your loop button up here at the top. You turn off and turn on. If I wanted a longer section, I can highlight that, Command L, Control L if you're on a PC, and there's your whole loop. Now if I wanted to duplicate my chord pattern so it is in the 16 bar loop, you would just highlight this, hit Command or Control D. Now you have 2. Or you can drag, hold Option, and continue to hold Option while you let go of the sample, and it will duplicate it for you. I'm not sure what the equivalent hotkey for PC is to drag it. I'm pretty sure it's Control, but that's that. Now because I only have one element in here currently, I'm going to leave it as such, and I'm going to loop it at 8 bars. So play it just so you can get an idea. Now, if you watched the last video, you'll know that my master is up at 6, and that means I need to turn down this volume so that I'm not clipping or distorting up at the top lines here. or here of your audio meter. So if I play it somewhere at like 10, it's probably going to come in nice and smooth. The other thing is we spoke about in the last video having this set to complex if the BPM was changed a lot. So just for an example, here's how it sounds as complex. Let me put my headphones on so I can hear it. And if I had it in beats, which is native when you just get Ableton Live, you'll hear some, it's not necessarily clipping, but it sounds kind of edgy, it doesn't sound smooth. So if I said to complex, wow, game changed. Perfect. So we have the first element in, it's pianos. I'm not going to get into the mixing in this session. We'll do that in the next episode and what I would do to attack individual elements. This is just working with samples and or MIDI. I will do both because I like to work with both for specific elements. It just suits my style. So we're going to start with that one. So what would be the next element? For me, I need something that can create a rhythm so I can play all my drums off of, so I would go with a kick drum. Now in house music, the kick drum is always on the one, so it's kick, 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 kick. Always. Now you can do a little variations of it just to, add some new rhythm to it, but for this we're gonna stick with a 4 on the floor kick drum pattern. So I'm gonna start in my kick and bass group, in my kick group, and a lot of the times I use a sample, but I think today I'm going to use a software kick, and this is Kick 2 by Sonic Academy. So first things what I'm going to do is, because it's a MIDI channel, you don't drop an audio sample into here because it only reads MIDI notes. So I'm going to highlight this, Command Shift and M will create a MIDI piano roll. Now I'm going to start on middle C, kick, 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 on every, quarter note. It's distorted, so turn that down. Now it's not going to go all the way over here because I've stretched it this long. What you will do, so come in here and you'll highlight from this point here to the end, and when all the notes are highlighted, and your highlighted area is this long, you can hit Command D or Control D 3 times, and now there's your kick drum. Because this MIDI is set to loop, I can now stretch this like this, or once again, you can just Command D. I label everything because I like to be organized and efficient with what I'm doing. So there's your kick. Now you can go in and alter everything about your kick, different samples, different kinds of kicks that you want, or make it from scratch on your own. For the purpose of this quick demonstration, I'm just going to leave it the way it is, and we're going to go into adding a couple more elements. So there's your kick and your chords happening. Now, while you're mixing your track and adding new elements, you're constantly micromanaging your loudness levels, so nothing's ever peaking or distorting. I found that a good starting area is to make sure that on each element, I found what you're looking for as far as the meters go on each element is you want to be hitting somewhere just over here, a little bit high, so maybe even somewhere at 10, because that's giving you some headroom for each element to sit in your mix. Now you see I'm not even hitting 0 yet. As you add more elements, it will climb up there, and we will constantly mix down. The more compression you put on an element, or you know, additional delays or something of that nature, delays being anything that kind of echoes off of your main sound, but the natural volume of the track is going to get louder the more elements you have inside it. So I have a kick and I have a chord pattern. It's a good base to a song. It's a good structure of your song. Next, I think I would add something like some hi-hats just to create a rhythm. Now there's one that I always like to use, which is the surf hat from Splice. So I throw it into my hats channel. It is a MIDI. It is a MIDI channel because I put an Ableton instrument, or a Ableton drum rack, which is stock in Ableton. And you can put instances of sampler in each one of these drum racks. So it goes all the way from there. And if you have a MIDI instrument as well, like I do, I have an Akai MPK49 key right here. If I had armed the track here, and there was more than just this one hi-hat in here, I could trigger each individual note here based off the keys on my instrument. So we're just going to use the one hi-hat for now, just to create my hi-hat rhythm that's gonna happen throughout the track. So we'll go to sampler, which is a plugin here. The hi-hat was dragged into it. And now we're gonna put a hi-hat right there. Once again, we'll duplicate them across, and you have your hi-hats. Now, I bring the velocities all the way up to 100, and I know that right now sounds robotic, but there's other elements that you'll throw on top of it so it sounds more human, like modulating just the top high frequencies with a plugin like Filter Freak, or just modulating it just a little bit so it doesn't feel so robotic. The other reason you do that is when you go into Filter Global tab here in Sampler, you have volume over velocity. So right now it sounds like, but the higher you bring up the volume over velocity, the more presence it has, and the more hardness it's coming down on. So you can go ahead and change the hat with attack, decay, sustain, or release to your heart's content. Those are the four main things is a bad word, but the four major concepts you need to understand how to shape sound. So the attack is how long it takes to get to its max volume. Decay is how long it takes to come down from its max volume. Sustain is how long it is sustained at its max volume, and release is how long it takes to fully get rid of the sound. So move the attack farther. You hear how that initial impact is, it now takes a lot longer to get to the top. So if you have the sustain all the way at the top, it's going to be at its peak volume the longest amount of time. As you come down, you'll notice it's more snappy. If you pull the release up, it sounds like the sound is drawing out a lot longer. And then the decay, there's a lot more weight to that hat. It's all represented here. So that's more in-depth mixing, which we're not going to go into right now. So let's just leave it at its stock settings. Just leave it just the way it is. So now you have a chord pattern, you have a kick, you have some hats all looping, and then you can go in and find a bass, or make a bass, or do whatever it is that you think you need to do on this specific production. Now, normally I would design a bass in a plugin like Serum, that you can get through Splice. It's a plugin made by Steve Duda, and it's amazing. This is not how it looks, actually. There's tons of other skins for it. I think it's gonna look like that when you pull it up, but you can get some cool little looks for them. Because I'm trying to do this quickly, I'm gonna find one on Splice, and I just do that by going here, adding some parameters, like I wanna work in deep house, and I wanna work in C minor, and I want my exact BPM to be at 120. Now, if you have a good ear for this, you can, you don't have to set your parameter to exactly 120. If you want to set it to 118 to 122, and you just have a good ear for it, and you go, okay, I know this works, it's just a little bit off timing, just listen to it, and you'll be able to go, okay, does this fit or does it not fit? And you'll be able to tell very quickly. So here we go. We got 8 local results that I already have in here, or the Splice library. So I'm just gonna play these and try to time it up with my beat and just see what I think works. Now, if it's coming in too loud on Splice, think of it like you're mixing a new sound outside of the software. So what you can do is you can just go up to Splice right here with the volume knob, and if one was obviously too loud, it may give you the wrong idea of whether or not it could fit. So just try to make sure that whatever you're playing in Splice, mixing it with your track, is kind of mixed in volume. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just so you can get a good idea. This hat's too loud, you can tell because it's already clipping here. Much vibier. It's not gonna work. Okay, so I found this one synth loop here that was in my same BPM and the same key of my song, and I really, really liked it. Now I'm obviously gonna have to mix it in and add some things to it, so it's not like I'm just slapping in the sample itself. But I thought it worked really well. I was listening to the chords and how this reacted with it, and I think it could work really well. So in a very short period of time, you have 4 elements that all work really well with each other, and now you can start being additionally creative and start putting your own flavor on things. Okay, now that you have your main elements inside your track, or at least some of your main elements inside your track, you can start to get an idea of how your track is going to go. So for example, if I was going into a breakdown of a song, this is after the intro, after the first drop, and the build up and the first drop, and then you want to break down to go back into the break afterwards, which is the kind of empty spot, which comes before the second drop, or depending on how you're structuring it. I know that in Deep House, this is how I'm going to structure my track, but I know for a fact that when it's going to come to the breakdown or into the break, I'm not going to have a kick on. I might have the hats just to bring it down, and in the break maybe you won't at all. Maybe you might just have the chords and the bass. So just by doing that, just by turning off the kick and the hat, I have an idea of where my break part's gonna go. So if I want to add some elements to my break to make it a little bit more interesting, like some effects on the side of the stereo field, meaning if you had headphones on the left and the right ear, or some other things happening in mono, which is straight down the middle, if you want to add some of those things, you would just turn off the ones that you know you don't want, and then you can start building up a different section of the song, but you can do it all here in an 8-bar loop. You know, and if you want to stretch out that time, you could just take everything that you have here by highlighting everything. So I clicked kick, which I know is always at my top, shift clicking at the bottom, and hit Command D or Control D, and Command L or Control L. Now you're looping everything. So let's say like this was the breakdown. So after the first drop, you're trying to come back down. Maybe you have some other synth elements happening. So let's just say it's coming down like this. Just as a very rough example. So let's go back. Command Z will undo anything that you had just done. So that's something good to know. As you can see, it's bringing that back. Command Shift Z will redo. So undo, redo. Command Z, Command Shift Z. And then the last thing that I'd like to talk about, at least for this episode, is if you're just trying to focus on, let's say, one frequency in your chords that was sticking out to you. You know, you've been listening to it over and over again, and there's just this one frequency that's bugging your ears. And this takes time to learn and to really understand the sounds that you're working with, and a trained ear to go, okay, I know that there's a frequency up in the high mids that I really, really don't like. Well, you can go ahead and solo the track by clicking the solo button, which means it's that sound alone on its own, solo. And you could go in and throw, let's say, an EQ in there. For people just working with stock Ableton, here's an EQ8. Let's say there's a little element up here that you really don't like. Some sort of like ringing frequency or something like that. You could just kind of sweep, is what they call it, an EQ sweep, because you're looking for the filter, or you're looking for the frequency rather. So there's just some buzzing up there and you want to get rid of it, you could just go and do that. Now a quick note about that, when trying to sweep and find a problem frequency, solo it, but don't do your mixing and your processing in solo. It's important to hear all the elements working together when you're doing these sweeps, because you could very quickly end up cutting out tons of your frequency of the sound, and then when played in the context of the mix, or playing with all your elements together in your project, things sound flat, things sound like there's too much missing from them. So mix in context of the mix, but when sweeping and looking for a problem frequency, do it in solo, find it, don't have anything else disrupting your ears. So I think that's going to do it for lesson 2, which is just starting to build a track, adding in some elements that you think sound great, and you want to start making a track from start to finish. So we've gone over how to loop things, how to solo things, a few different little tips, and how to pick samples and make MIDI notes to trigger your plugins, which are third-party instruments, in Ableton, so you can start the basics of making a beat. As you can see, relatively quick if you can do it this way, to start getting the just original ideas down first, and then do all the technical and creative things afterwards. Now don't stop at, kick, bass, a hat, and chords. Continue to build off of that, and you'll quickly see that how full your production can get. And with some important mixing techniques, as you progress like that, you'll see how much you can really fit into a track. So in the next lesson, we're going to go over some mixing techniques, what you would do to start. We're probably going to add in some more sounds, and what are some of the basic plugins that you would put on as far as mixing goes. So some EQs, some compression, and in a later video we will get to the more creative things afterwards, like reverb and delay. So that'll do it for Ableton Basics number 2. We will do number 3 very shortly.